It was supposed to be another orchestrated palace, gathering a perfectly polished display of unity. But that night, with a single sentence, Princess Charlotte shattered the illusion, earning her mother's tearful applause as Camilla's composure cracked under the weight of what was said. The Windsor banquet was meticulously planned, like all royal occasions. The room glowed with golden cutlery, crystal glasses, and dignified silence broken only by polite murmurs. It was meant to ease tensions after months of quiet feuding. King Charles's family brought together under one roof, smiling for the cameras, reassuring the world that the monarchy was intact. Yet the air was heavy, even before it began. Everyone painfully aware of the unspoken rifts. Charlotte sat between her parents, her small frame dwarfed by the grandeur of the long table. But her eyes never wavered, flicking between Camilla and her father, then back to her mother, as though she had already decided what she would do. The moment came during the toasts. Charles rose and spoke in soft tones about modern royal women, acknowledging their grace under pressure and their strength in carrying tradition forward. His words, though carefully chosen, carried a subtle undercurrent, one that seemed to celebrate the present at the expense of the past. Then Camilla stood, raising her glass, her smile sharp as she spoke of new beginnings and the wisdom of learning from history without clinging to it. She didn't mention Diana, not once. That was when Charlotte moved. Quietly at first, she pushed her chair back. The screech of wood on marble cut through the murmur of conversation. Heads turned. She stood, cheeks flushed but her voice clear and unwavering. "That history," she began, her gaze locked on Camilla, "isn't something you can erase." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Camilla's confident smile faltered. A ripple of gasps swept down the table. William froze, visibly torn between shock and pride, while Catherine's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes glistening. Then slowly, she clasped her hands together and whispered one word, loud enough for all to hear: "Bravo." Witnesses said the silence that followed was deafening. Camilla's face went pale, and she visibly staggered before sinking back into her chair. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but no words came. Catherine's soft, tearful applause broke the spell, followed by a low murmur of confusion and disbelief. Camilla lowered her gaze, her hand clutching the edge of the table, and after a long, tense pause, she rose abruptly and left the room without a word. A sob escaped her as she crossed the threshold, disappearing into the shadows beyond the door. The room was left in stunned silence. Royal aides fumbled, unsure whether to follow her or to stay put, their eyes darting helplessly to Charles, who sat motionless, his fork frozen mid-air. He didn't move, didn't speak, as if the weight of his granddaughter's words had rendered him powerless. But how did a young princess find the strength to confront the queen consort so boldly? The answer lies in years of silent observation and simmering hurt. Behind the sparkling tiaras and perfect smiles, Princess Charlotte carried scars no camera could capture. Her courage that night was no accident. It was the culmination of countless slights and whispered truths. Long before she ever stood in defiance at that Windsor banquet, Charlotte had already begun to feel the quiet injustice that settled like a shadow over the royal halls. Even as a child, she could sense the subtle power struggle that played out in corners of the palace where no one thought she was listening. During family gatherings, she would watch Camilla skillfully command the room, her words polished, but her presence eclipsing the faint traces of the woman everyone else seemed too afraid to name Diana. Charlotte began noticing how Diana's photographs were placed just out of sight, her name only invoked when absolutely necessary, and even then, softened with carefully chosen language. She heard Camilla once describe Diana as a complicated chapter we've all learned from, spoken in a tone that was anything but respectful. That phrase stuck with Charlotte. It rang in her ears every time she passed the grand portraits of former queens, knowing her grandmother's memory was not afforded the same reverence. In moments like these, when anger and confusion churned inside her, it was Catherine who became her refuge. At night, when the corridors were finally quiet, Catherine would sit on the edge of Charlotte's bed, smoothing her hair, whispering stories about Diana. Stories of kindness and bravery, of how she loved her sons fiercely, even as the world turned against her. Catherine's voice would tremble with both admiration and regret, as though she herself still struggled under the weight of what had been lost. Those stories lit something in Charlotte, a quiet rebellion she carried in her chest, like a secret flame. As she grew older, that flame only burned brighter. Each passing year brought more examples of how Camilla sought to redefine the family's legacy, her words and actions casting longer shadows over the memory of the grandmother Charlotte had never met but felt deeply connected to. When Catherine caught Charlotte staring at one of Diana's old brooches one afternoon, she said softly, "You have her courage, you know. You just don't realize it yet." And so Charlotte began preparing herself. In the privacy of her room, she would practice the words she longed to say, whispering them to the walls. She imagined herself at the grand table, finding her voice at just the right moment, and making them all see what they had tried so hard to forget. The more Camilla attempted to dominate the narrative, the more determined Charlotte became to one day speak the truth. She didn't yet know when that moment would come, but she was certain it would. She carried her quiet resolve like armor, waiting. And then came the moment when Camilla crossed a line. Charlotte could no longer ignore an incident that ignited her defiance. In a locked room full of jewels, Charlotte's hand hovered over Diana's iconic crown until Camilla intervened, snatching it away with words that would haunt the young princess forever. The preparations for the ceremonial portrait had begun hours earlier, with royal dressers bustling about, laying out gowns and jewels in precise order. It was meant to be a moment of pride for Charlotte, a chance to glimpse the family's legacy up close, to feel like a part of the tradition she was destined to inherit. But that illusion shattered the instant her fingers brushed the sapphire and diamond tiara her grandmother had once worn. The collection of royal crowns and diadems glittered before her, each with its own history, its own silent story of triumph and tragedy. Yet it was Diana's tiara that drew her in immediately, as though it called her by name. Without hesitation, she reached for it, her heart beating faster, with every inch closer. But just before she could lift it, a voice sliced through the silence. "Camilla, that crown is not yours to wear," she said sharply, her tone stripping the words of all pretense. Charlotte froze. The queen consort stepped forward, her hand closing firmly around the tiara as she pulled it back. "It belongs," Camilla continued, her eyes narrowing, "to the future of the monarchy, not its past." Charlotte stood there, her cheeks hot, her breath caught in her throat. She felt as though the room itself had shrunk around her. Catherine was there too, standing off to the side, silent, her face betraying nothing but faint discomfort. She didn't move to intervene. She didn't even meet Charlotte's eyes. That silence hurt almost as much as Camilla's words. Then came the final insult. Camilla set the sapphire tiara back into its velvet case, and instead plucked a smaller, plainer diadem from the tray. She thrust it toward Charlotte, saying, "This one is more suitable for your station. It's more appropriate." Charlotte's hands closed around the offered diadem, but inside, her fury burned so bright it was almost blinding. She forced herself to remain calm, to keep her back straight and her chin high as she turned and left the room. But every step she took was heavy with resolve. She promised herself, then and there, that she would never forget that moment or forgive it. Each word Camilla uttered that day was seared into her memory, fueling her quiet rebellion. That crown was more than just a piece of jewelry. To Charlotte, it was proof that her grandmother's legacy still lived, still demanded to be honored. And to be told it didn't belong to her felt like being told Diana didn't belong to her either. But even with her resolve solidified, she needed someone to believe in her. A quiet ally who knew what it meant to challenge palace power. It wasn't just Charlotte who carried Diana's shadow. Catherine, too, bore the weight of watching history repeat itself. And in the privacy of her daughter's room, she finally admitted it. The night before the Windsor banquet, Catherine found Charlotte standing before her mirror, whispering words under her breath, her small fists clenched at her sides. Her eyes blazed with a quiet determination that startled even her mother. At first, Catherine said nothing, simply watching from the doorway as Charlotte practiced what she would say. But then her own composure cracked, and she stepped inside, unable to keep silent any longer. She confessed to her daughter what she had never told anyone, not even William. She told her how she, too, had endured Camilla's quiet undermining for years. How she had stood at countless events, forced to smile as the woman who had replaced Diana dismissed her with subtle gestures and loaded words. Catherine admitted she had swallowed her pride time and again, hoping it would preserve peace in the family, but the humiliation had cut her deeply. Each slight, each correction, each condescending comment had left scars no one else could see. For the first time, mother and daughter wept together, neither hiding their pain. Catherine held Charlotte's face in her hands, her tears falling freely as she whispered, "Be braver than I was." That single sentence, weighted with years of regret, settled between them like a vow. Catherine promised her daughter then and there that no matter what happened, even if it cost her favor in the family or shattered what little peace they had left, she would stand by Charlotte. Her loyalty to her daughter outweighed every other obligation. That night became more than just an intimate moment. It became Charlotte's foundation heading into the infamous dinner. Every word her mother had spoken gave her strength, as if the weight of both Diana's memory and Catherine's struggles were now resting on her shoulders. The two of them stayed awake until nearly dawn, planning together, whispering strategies in the dark. Catherine, always calculating but now emboldened by her daughter's fire, even coached her on timing, telling her exactly when and how to speak for maximum effect. "Wait until she thinks she's won," Catherine had said softly. "Then take it from her. Don't let them see you hesitate." It was in that fragile, tear-streaked moment that a quiet alliance formed, mother and daughter united in defiance of the palace's unspoken rules. And so, with her mother's blessing and her grandmother's spirit, Charlotte entered the banquet with quiet fury and an unforgettable message. When the time came, Charlotte didn't flinch. Her voice, steady yet sharp, echoed through the hall as Catherine's eyes glistened and Camilla's composure crumbled into tears. The dinner had unfolded like a meticulously staged play, each moment rehearsed, each word chosen to uphold the illusion of unity. The toast began harmlessly enough, with Charles thanking those present for their unwavering loyalty to the crown. But then Camilla rose, glass in hand, her tone sweet, yet laced with the quiet cruelty Charlotte had learned to recognize. She spoke of modern royal women, with glowing praise, celebrating their resilience, their progress, their ability to look forward rather than back. But then came the dagger she referred to Diana's era as a cautionary tale, claiming the monarchy had moved beyond such turbulence, implying the past was best left buried. The words struck Charlotte like a whip crack. For a second, the room blurred around her. Then came the screech of her chair as she pushed it back, the sound slicing through the air like a warning bell. Every head turned. She rose slowly, her shoulders square, her hands trembling but her voice firm. "You can rewrite history in speeches," she said, her eyes locked on Camilla, "but you'll never erase my grandmother's crown or her memory." For a moment, no one breathed. The words hung in the air, heavy and defiant, echoing through the cavernous room. Catherine's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes brimming. Then she began to clap, softly at first, her hands trembling as tears slipped down her cheeks. "Bravo, my darling," she whispered, her voice breaking but proud. Camilla stood frozen, her cheeks flushing, her hands tightening around her glass. Then her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of fury, humiliation, perhaps even fear. She stammered, trying to summon words that would save her dignity, but nothing came. Finally, with a sharp turn, she fled the room, her heels clicking furiously on the marble, as whispers and gasps swelled behind her. The remaining royals sat in stunned silence, their faces etched with disbelief. Some lowered their eyes, others exchanged glances of awe and apprehension. But no one moved. In that moment, the weight of Charlotte's words rippled far beyond the confines of the hall, shattering not just the evening's fragile peace, but something deeper, something woven into the very fabric of the monarchy itself. But as the doors slammed behind Camilla, the palace walls began to shake not just emotionally, but politically. No queen consort would surrender without a fight. Camilla retreated to her private chambers, but behind closed doors, she plotted to regain control and crush Charlotte's newfound power. The moment the doors shut behind her after the banquet, Camilla's tears dried into something far colder. Within hours, she summoned her closest aides, their faces pale as they gathered in her study. The queen consort made her intentions clear. She would not allow herself to be humiliated in her own palace, not by a child, and certainly not by Catherine's scheming influence. Her plan was swift and calculated. She instructed her aides to craft a narrative portraying Charlotte not as brave, but as manipulated, a pawn in her mother's hands. Leaks to the tabloids began almost immediately. Headlines appeared, suggesting Catherine had orchestrated the entire confrontation to garner public sympathy, painting her as a quiet master of palace drama and Charlotte as an innocent child dragged into adult conflict. These stories dripped with insinuation, each one chipping away at the image of Charlotte's courage, each one designed to confuse the public and redirect their outrage. And yet, despite her efforts, cracks in Camilla's strategy began to show. Charles, outwardly neutral as always, let the press speculate without comment. But palace insiders revealed that privately, he had warned Camilla to stand down before it goes too far. He recognized the danger of inflaming the situation and understood what Camilla did not. Public sentiment was already shifting. William, meanwhile, made his own silent statement. He canceled 2 scheduled public appearances alongside Camilla in the days that followed, leaving her to face photographers alone. His absence spoke volumes, a quiet but unmistakable show of disapproval. Catherine, however, stayed silent. She refused to speak to Camilla directly, refusing even a private audience when requested. Instead, she released a cryptic statement praising the courage of the young to speak truth when others dare not, a comment so cutting it left no doubt where her loyalties lay. Inside the palace walls, the staff themselves began to splinter. Whispers ran through the corridors as aides and attendants quietly took sides. Some aligned themselves with Camilla, citing tradition and stability, while others began referring to Charlotte as the little lioness in hushed, admiring tones. Camilla could feel her authority slipping, no matter how hard she tried to claw it back. But while Camilla plotted her comeback, the public response erupted like a tidal wave, rendering her schemes nearly powerless. Britain hadn't seen this kind of public adoration since Diana herself. But this time, it was her granddaughter, standing in the light, hailed as the true heir to the people's princess. The day after the confrontation, the world awakened to something extraordinary. Social media became a battlefield of admiration and outrage, with hashtags like #Bravo Charlotte and #Diana Lives On is flooding every corner of the internet. Millions of posts carried snapshots of Charlotte's words, videos leaked from inside the banquet, and endless commentary declaring that the spirit of Diana had returned not as a faint memory, but as a living force in her granddaughter. The gates of Kensington Palace were soon buried under mountains of flowers and handwritten notes. Strangers came from all over the country, some traveling for hours just to lay a single rose, some standing quietly in tears, murmuring how they had waited decades to see someone speak Diana's truth. Children drew pictures of Charlotte and left them taped to the iron gates. Candles burned through the night, and voices rose in song, soft but defiant. Opinion polls painted an even starker picture. Camilla's favorability rating plummeted within days, reaching levels so low palace officials reportedly panicked. The Queen Consort's name became synonymous with suppression and bitterness, while Charlotte's name rose alongside her grandmother's as a beacon of courage and authenticity. Even newspapers that typically tiptoed around palace scandals published unflinching headlines, declaring Charlotte the new voice of a silenced past. Across London, public murals began to appear overnight. One showed Diana and Charlotte side by side, their hands clasped, with the words, "She speaks, we remember," painted above them. Another showed Charlotte standing atop the words, "Never forgotten," her eyes blazing with resolve. It was as if the city itself became a canvas for the nation's grief, pride, and longing for something unspoken. Media outlets on both sides of the Atlantic ran feature after feature, praising not only Charlotte's courage, but also Catherine's quiet, unshakable support. Analysts remarked on the precision of their defiance, how mother and daughter had struck the perfect balance between outrage and grace. Photographs of Catherine standing slightly behind her daughter at the palace gates became symbolic of a new kind of monarchy, one that didn't flinch in the face of history. Even world leaders, though careful in their words, quietly acknowledged the symbolic weight of the moment. A former U.S. president sent a private letter to Kensington commending Charlotte's bravery. A European prime minister tweeted that it was the kind of honesty the world needs from its future leaders. The public had chosen their side decisively, and their voices grew louder by the hour. But as the crowds outside the palace grew, the pressure inside reached a breaking point, forcing the monarch himself to intervene. For too long, he had let silence reign. But now, with his family in tatters and the crown under scrutiny, Charles finally stood up not just as king, but as a father and grandfather. The public fallout had grown too fierce to ignore. The walls of Buckingham Palace echoed not with the confidence of a ruling dynasty, but with the murmurs of division, betrayal, and a power shift no one had anticipated. It wasn't just about Camilla's public embarrassment or Charlotte's sudden rise in public esteem. It was about control, legacy, and the terrifying realization that the monarchy itself was being rewritten by a child's voice and a nation's memory of Diana. Charles understood that the issue could no longer be smothered in silence or brushed aside with polite statements. So he did what no one expected. He called for both Charlotte and Camilla to meet him privately at Windsor. It was a rare move, highly unusual, but Charles knew the old ways wouldn't hold. Not now. Not after the world had declared a young girl braver than the very institution she was born into. He met with Charlotte first. Her presence in the room was not one of defiance, but of dignity. She didn't apologize. She didn't retreat. Charles looked into the eyes of his granddaughter and saw not rebellion, but clarity. He told her, gently but firmly, that while her courage had moved a nation, there was a balance to be struck. Bravery, he said, must be wielded with care when you stand in the shadow of the crown. He urged her to protect the institution even as she challenged it, to fight not with fury, but with foresight. Still, he admitted, with a pause that said more than words ever could, that he admired her strength and was proud of her. But the conversation with Camilla was different. It was colder, sharper. Years of loyalty, of private compromise, of shared ambitions, all of it now felt fragile. Charles didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Instead, he told her, "Diana's shadow will never leave these walls, nor should it." The sentence hung in the air like a judgment. He told her the public would never accept a monarchy that erased one of its most beloved figures. And worse, he no longer would, either. He requested that Camilla temporarily step back from engagements involving Charlotte, at least until the storm passed. It wasn't punishment, it was survival. When Catherine learned of what Charles had said, she reportedly broke down in tears. For the first time in years, she felt seen not just as a consort or a mother, but as someone who had stood in the fire and finally found protection from the crown itself. The palace, sensing the magnitude of the moment, released a rare public statement affirming Diana's indelible legacy and everlasting place in the heart of the royal family. The act, though subtle, signaled something seismic. The crown had shifted. The institution was no longer just defending tradition, it was being forced to evolve. But even with the dust beginning to settle, the question on everyone's lips was chilling. Had the monarchy just glimpsed its own future in the fiery eyes of a young princess? In the echo of that fateful night, a new chapter began not just for Charlotte, but for the entire monarchy. And behind her poised smile, the fire of revolution still flickered. What had started as an audacious act of defiance became something far greater, an unspoken pact between the public and a girl who refused to let silence dictate her story. Inside the palace, whispers of change began to surface. Palace insiders revealed that Charlotte was now being quietly groomed for greater public roles. Her schedule adjusted to include more engagements, her presence subtly woven into the fabric of the monarchy's future. No one said it outright, but everyone seemed to know. She was no longer just a child in line for a distant throne. She was something else entirely. Catherine, in moments of candor with her closest confidants, reportedly described her daughter as a force the palace isn't ready for. There was pride in her words, but also a tinge of worry, because power, this raw, this unfiltered, was as dangerous as it was necessary. Catherine knew better than anyone how sharp the walls of the institution could become when challenged, how quickly its warmth could turn to ice. Yet she could also see that Charlotte was born to withstand it all. Meanwhile, Camilla receded from view. Her once indomitable presence at events was replaced with quiet absences. Her appearances reduced, her influence visibly diminished. Even those who had stood by her began to step back, acknowledging what the public had already declared, that the tide had turned. And the queen consort was no longer the undisputed Queen of Hearts. Outside those gilded walls, the world continued to see Charlotte as the embodiment of Diana's courage. Her name became a symbol, her likeness etched alongside her grandmother's on banners, murals, and magazine covers. Editorials praised her as the soul of Diana reborn, and speculated about how far her fearless resolve might carry her not just through the expected roles of a princess, but perhaps far beyond. In pubs, schools, and offices, conversations buzzed with the same question: could Charlotte be the one to truly reshape the monarchy from within? Some dared to imagine a future where she rose even higher than her birthright allowed, where she became not just a figurehead, but a leader who rewrote the rules themselves. History already seemed poised to remember her not merely as a princess, but as the girl who dared to speak truth at the royal table, who stared down a crown and refused to flinch. And so, the crown trembles not from scandal or betrayal, but from the unstoppable spirit of a young girl who refused to stay silent. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.